In 2009, while she was still the best tennis player alive, Serena Williams quietly bought a piece of the NFL team Miami Dolphins. She was 27 at that time, and the team was worth about $1 billion. Today, it's worth more than 4 times that. But that's not the only business move she made associated with Florida. She owns a venture fund that's backed close to 100 companies, mansions strung along 20 miles of Florida coastline, slices of a soccer club, a golf league, and Canada's first WNBA franchise as well. And here's the part that is worth paying attention to. She didn't build any of that in retirement. She was doing it while she was still ranked #1 in the world, still winning Grand Slams, and nobody noticed what she's doing off the field. Let's get into her massive Florida empire. Chapter 1. The NFL stake she bought at 27. Let's start with the Dolphins because it's the single most misunderstood thing Serena Williams owns. Picture the summer of 2009. Serena is 27, she's ranked at the top of the sport, she's in the middle of an absolutely monstrous run of Grand Slam titles. And in the middle of all that, she and her sister Venus show up at the Miami Dolphins practice facility in Davie, Florida, in matching beige dresses and heels sinking into the turf, to be introduced as part owners of an NFL franchise. Team owner Stephen Ross had been selling small slices of the team to famous people: Gloria and Emilio Estefan, Jimmy Buffett, Mark Anthony, and the Williams sisters bought in. And in doing it, they became the first Black women ever to hold an ownership stake in an NFL team. In a league where the overwhelming majority of players are Black and essentially none of the owners were, 2 sisters from Compton walked into that room and took a piece. And the financial side is the part people sleep on. When they bought in, the Dolphins were valued at roughly $1 billion. In the years since, that number has climbed past $4.5 billion. Now, to be clear, these are small minority stakes, not controlling shares. Nobody's handing Serena the draft board. But a small slice of an asset that quadruples is exactly the kind of quiet, boring, enormously profitable move that separates athletes who stay rich from athletes who don't. And listen to what she actually said about why she did it. She said that having spent so much of her childhood in the area, being part of a staple of Miami culture was a huge honor. Venus put it even more simply. We're South Florida girls. When we get off the road, this is where we come home to. South Florida girls. That's the thing people forget about Serena Williams. Everybody knows the Compton origin story. It's a movie, it's a legend, it's the whole mythology. But Serena Williams has actually spent almost her entire life in Florida. At the time they bought into the Dolphins, both sisters were living in Palm Beach Gardens, about an hour's drive from the stadium. And Venus described going to games as this strange gift. That when you're playing tennis, you're so locked in, you never actually feel the atmosphere. But sitting in a football stadium, they got to soak it in and realize, oh my God, we do this too. And the reason they ended up in that state at all involves a tennis coach, a genuinely terrifying phone call, and a Volkswagen that was actively falling apart. Chapter 2. The Volkswagen that drove her to Florida. In 1991, a Florida tennis coach named Rick Maxey got a phone call from a man in Compton, California, who wanted him to come look at his daughters. That man was Richard Williams, and the way he pitched the trip is one of my favorite lines in sports history. Maxey says Richard told him, "The only thing I can guarantee you is that you won't get shot." Maxey thought he was joking. He flew to LA, took a cab to Compton, and the next morning the Williams family picked him up in a Volkswagen that was physically shaking as it drove, with about 2 months of fast food wrappers piled in the back. Maxey sat down in the passenger seat and got stabbed by a spring poking through the upholstery. This is a guy who ran an academy at a nice Florida resort where Jennifer Capriati had trained, sitting in a rattling VW thinking, what am I doing here? They pulled up to the public courts, which were covered in broken glass. Richard called them, jokingly, the East Compton Hills Country Club. And the man's coaching methods were their own kind of genius. He deliberately used old, dead tennis balls that barely bounced, so his daughters would have to run harder and bend lower to reach everything. Maxey hit with the girls for a while and, honestly, wasn't impressed at first. Venus was all arms and legs and hair beads flying everywhere. Serena, at 9 years old, he described as already visibly built like an athlete. And then came the moment that changed everything. Venus asked to go to the bathroom, And as she walked off the court, she flipped up onto her hands and walked 10 straight yards on her palms, then dropped into backward cartwheels for another 10. Maxey said he watched that and thought, "I've got a female Michael Jordan on my hands." Speaking of what it takes to see a champion where no one else would look, a lot of it comes down to how the brain performs when it matters. That's the idea behind an audio series called The Genius Switch. It's based on the neuroscience of the flow state, that mode where focus and creativity click at the same time. And the whole routine is just listening with headphones a few minutes a day. It's a one-time $39, less than a single online course, and it's backed by a 90-day money-back guarantee, so you can test it on yourself with nothing to lose. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera, or tap the first link in the description. Now, back to the gamble that uprooted everything. So the entire Williams family packed up and moved across the country to West Palm Beach, Florida, so the girls could train at Massey's Academy in Delray Beach. Venus was 10, Serena was 9. And that same year, Richard did the thing that had the entire tennis establishment calling him crazy. He yanked both daughters out of the junior tournament circuit completely, refusing to let them grind through the youth competition meat grinder that had chewed up other prodigies. People said he was sabotaging their careers. He was, in fact, building the two greatest players of a generation in Florida in near total isolation. And the man was working from an actual document. Richard Williams famously wrote an 85-page plan for his daughters' careers before they were even old enough to hold a racket properly, and then executed it for the next 20 years. They trained under Massey from 1991 until 1995, when Richard took the coaching back over himself. So Serena spent the formative years of her life, 9 to 13, the years that make you who you are, on Florida courts, in Florida heat, being drilled by a father running a plan he'd written before she could read. That's the thing to hold on to here. Florida isn't a place Serena Williams moved to once she got rich. Florida is where she was made. Which is exactly why, 7 years later, she did something no teenager does. Chapter 3. The Mansion. Two teenagers built. In 1998, Serena Williams and her sister Venus bought land. Not a house, land. A 1-acre home site inside a gated country club community called Ballenilles in Palm Beach Gardens for $525,000. Serena was 16 years old. Venus was 18. Sit with that for a second. 7 years earlier, they'd arrived in this county as kids from Compton in a Volkswagen full of fast food wrappers. And now they were teenagers buying property inside a gated golf community in the same zip code. And they didn't just buy it and flip it. They spent 2 full years designing and building an 8,500 square foot mansion on it, with 2 primary suites, one for each sister, so neither had to be the guest in the other's house. Multiple living areas, a resort-style backyard, a pool, a spa, private lake views. 2 young women in their teens and early 20s building a house together on their own money, while simultaneously taking over professional tennis. And here's what tells you it wasn't a trophy purchase. They lived in that house together for nearly 2 decades. Not a season, not a couple of years between tours, decades. Through the Serena Slam, through the #1 rankings, through both of their careers exploding into global fame, they were roommates in a house they'd built as teenagers. They finally listed it in 2018 and sold it in early 2019 for $2.3 million. That house is the foundation stone of the whole Florida empire, and the pattern it establishes is the one Serena has repeated ever since. She doesn't buy in a place because it's fashionable. She buys where her actual life is. Because while she was still competing, she kept quietly expanding her footprint across the same 20-mile stretch of Palm Beach County coastline. And the properties got a lot bigger. Chapter 4. The Jupiter Compound. Here's the thing about Serena's Florida real estate. It looks less like a celebrity collecting trophies and more like somebody methodically buying up their own neighborhood. In May of 2015, she picked up a newly built 5,600 square foot Georgian-style home in Palm Beach Gardens for $2.5 million. Marble floors, a 3-car garage, a pool with an outdoor kitchen, and sold it about 6 years later for a bit under $3 million. Then in 2017, she made the move that became her real base, spending $5.7 million on a Spanish Mediterranean waterfront estate in Jupiter, a little further up the coast. And what happened to that house is the best detail in this whole section, because she handed the renovation to her sister. Venus Williams runs an interior design firm called V-Star, and Venus gutted the place and rebuilt it as a sleek, ultra-modern, art-forward home. Gym, sauna, wine cellar, infinity pool, a karaoke room, because obviously, and a walk-in closet measuring 620 square feet, which, for reference, is bigger than a lot of actual apartments. Serena's closet is somebody's studio. Then in September of 2020, she went bigger. Using an LLC, she bought the Jupiter mansion belonging to St. Louis Cardinals catcher Yadier Molina for $8 million. A riverfront estate spread across roughly 4 acres with something like 10,000 square feet of house, 8 bedrooms, a guest house, a pool, and both tennis and basketball courts on the property. And she's been playing the other side of the market too. In 2018, she sold off a vacant lot she owned on Bears Club Drive. That's the ultra-exclusive Jack Nicklaus-designed community, for $6 million to the CEO of Patron Tequila. Added up, and the purchase price of her holdings runs north of $20 million, concentrated almost entirely in one small stretch of Florida coastline, plus a place in Los Angeles and an apartment in Paris. But here's the thing. The real estate is genuinely the least impressive part of this empire. Because while everyone was tracking which mansions Serena Williams bought, she was quietly building something that would eventually make the houses look like pocket change. Chapter 5. The fund she started while still winning slams. Here's the fact that reframes everything you think about Serena Williams' business career. She didn't start it after tennis. She started it in the middle of tennis, and she deliberately kept quiet about it for years. Around 2014, while she was still ranked number 1, still winning majors, still very much the most dominant athlete in her sport, Serena launched a venture capital firm called Serena Ventures. And her reason for starting it is a genuinely damning statistic that she came across and couldn't let go of. Less than 2% of venture capital funding goes to women, and less than 1% goes to people of color. So she started writing checks into early-stage companies, mostly founded by the people the industry systematically ignores. And here's the strategic brilliance of how she did it. She didn't announce a fund and then go looking for deals, which is what most celebrities do, and why most celebrity funds are a joke. She built the portfolio first, quietly, for the better part of a decade, and only announced the formal fund once she had a track record nobody could laugh at. That announcement came in 2022, a $111 million inaugural fund, and she timed it to land right alongside her retirement from tennis, which meant every single outlet on earth writing about Serena Williams leaving the sport also ran paragraphs about her new venture fund. The retirement coverage became the launch coverage. Marketing budget, 0. And the portfolio is not a vanity project. Serena Ventures has backed close to 100 companies, and by her own count, more than 14 of them have crossed into unicorn territory, meaning valuations above $1 billion. She was in masterclass early. She's described finding them as 8 people working in a small room in a garage in San Francisco. She's backed Impossible Foods, Noom, Coinbase, Tonal, Isuzu, and a long list of others. 79% of the companies in the portfolio are led by underrepresented founders. And she's blunt about what drives it. She's said that whether it's venture people telling her she shouldn't be doing this, or tennis people telling her she'd never be any good, part of her will always enjoy proving people wrong. So no, Serena Williams didn't retire and become a businesswoman. She retired to focus full-time on the business she'd already been running for 8 years. And that's before you count everything with her actual name stamped on it. Chapter 6. The brands with her name on them. Once you understand that Serena treats ownership as the whole point, her personal brand portfolio makes a lot more sense, because she consistently chooses to own things rather than just be paid to appear in them. She's got a fashion line, S by Serena. She launched a beauty brand called Win Beauty, built around the idea of makeup that actually holds up when you're sweating and moving, which is about as on-brand as a product concept can possibly get for a woman who spent 20 years being photographed mid-sprint. She's got Will Perform, a wellness and pain relief line, and Serena Williams Jewelry. And she started 926 Productions, a media company explicitly built to amplify women and diverse storytellers. which landed a first-look deal with Amazon Studios essentially out of the gate. Plus, she and Venus have teamed up with Will Smith to produce sports documentaries. Notice what's not in that list. There's no vanity vodka, no fragrance with a stranger's face slapped on it. These are operating businesses in categories she actually lives in, and in most of them she's the owner, not the spokesperson. And layered on top of all of that is the endorsement machine, which is genuinely staggering because of how long it's outlasted her playing career. Nike, Gatorade, Wilson, deals that have kept paying her years after her final professional match at the 2022 US Open because her cultural value never depended on her ranking. Put it together with the roughly $95 million she earned in prize money over her career, more than any woman has ever earned playing tennis by a wide margin. And Forbes has pegged her personal net worth at around $340 million, landing her on their list of America's richest self-made women. But here's the pattern that ties her whole second act together, and it goes right back to that Dolphins stake she bought at 27. Serena Williams has spent the last 15 years systematically buying pieces of sports teams, and the ones she's chosen say everything about what she's actually trying to do. Chapter 7. The Team Collector. If you line up Serena Williams' team ownership stakes, a very deliberate strategy jumps out immediately. Start with Angel City FC, the Los Angeles women's professional soccer club, which she co-owns alongside her husband Alexis Ohanian. And, in the detail that everybody loves, their daughter Olympia was named as an owner as a toddler, making her one of the youngest team owners in professional sports. Then there's the Los Angeles Golf Club, her stake in the tech-driven golf league founded by Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy in partnership with the PGA Tour. In March of 2025, she took an ownership role in the Toronto Tempo, Canada's very first WNBA franchise. And through Serena Ventures, she's put money into Unrivaled, the 3-on-3 women's basketball league, whose valuation climbed to around $340 million on the back of a funding round she participated in. Look at that list again. Women's soccer, women's basketball, a Canadian WNBA expansion team, a new golf league. This is not a woman randomly buying sports memorabilia. This is somebody putting her capital directly into women's professional sports, which is the exact sector that spent her entire career being told it wasn't commercially serious. She spent 20 years being the biggest proof that people will absolutely pay to watch women compete, and now she's buying the leagues. And the Miami Dolphins stake sits at the front of all of it, the very first move, made when she was 27, and everyone assumed she was just a tennis player who'd bought a fun toy. 16 years later, it's obvious it was never a toy. It was the first line item in a portfolio built by somebody who understood, extremely early, that playing the game and owning the game are two completely different businesses. Which brings us back to the question underneath this whole video. Why, with all that money and all those options, does she still live in the same little corner of Florida she landed in as a 9-year-old? Chapter 8. Why she never left. Serena Williams could live absolutely anywhere on the planet. She's got the money, the private jet access, the global fame. She lives in Jupiter, Florida, roughly 20 miles up the road from where a rattling Volkswagen dropped her family off in 1991. And she's not there alone. Venus lives nearby. Their parents are in the Palm Beach area. She's raising 2 daughters, Olympia and Adira, with Alexis Ohanian in a house her own sister designed. The woman who has won 23 Grand Slam singles titles, more than anyone in the modern era, chose to build her adult life inside the same 20-mile radius that took in a 9-year-old from Compton and turned her into the greatest to ever play. That's not an accident, and it's not a lack of imagination. It's somebody who figured out early exactly what she valued and then refused to be talked out of it. And that's the real shape of the Florida empire once you stop counting square footage. It's an NFL stake bought while she was still winning majors. A venture fund built in secret over 8 years and unveiled at the perfect moment. Close to 100 companies, more than 14 of them worth over $1 billion. A portfolio of women's sports teams bought by the woman who proved women's sports were worth buying. Brands she owns, instead of brands that rent her face. All of it run out of a stretch of coastline where her sister lives down the road, and her parents are a short drive away. Most athletes spend their careers being paid to perform, and then spend their retirement trying to figure out what comes next. Serena Williams never had that problem because she'd been quietly answering that question since she was 27, in between winning tournaments, while the entire sports world watched her forehand and completely missed what she was actually building. The girl who showed up in a beat-up Volkswagen with broken glass courts behind her now owns a piece of the state's football team, a fund backing the founders nobody else would fund, and the neighborhood that made her. That's not a comeback story. That's a woman who was playing a much longer game than anyone realized. If stories about how the biggest names turn fame into empires they actually own are what brought you here, subscribe to Black Status and we'll keep delivering them. See you in the next one.